Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Welcome to this episode of the Software People Stories. My guest today, Tom Henriksen, is well known for the Agile online summit that he has been hosting for over the last 5 years. Today, we get to understand his origin story and how curiosity drives him to do all the things that he does, and in particular, some more details about how the Agile Online Summit came to be and what innovations we expect this year and in the future. He also shares his career advice for entry-level and mid-career professionals in IT. Listen on. Welcome to the Software People Stories, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Shiv. I enjoy your stuff, and I'm looking forward to being here.
Yeah, I guess it's a mutual admiration society. I also like your Agile Online Summit. We'll talk about that. And that has been a really interesting and useful resource. But we'll start with your origin story. Now, how did you get into IT and what have you been doing as a career trajectory?
Yeah. Well, how I got into IT is kind of an interesting path. So, Shiv, when I first got out of college, I actually was in sales. So, you know, that's probably hard to believe, someone in IT, but I got into sales and I did that for about a year and a half. And I realized I wasn't fitting really well in sales. But luckily for me, a friend from high school had shared with me the opportunity in tech. So I actually kind of made a career shift and got into technology and started doing a lot of programming and things like that. And then as I kind of went through my career path, I got into this thing called Agile. I remember the first time I heard of it, I had a boss at the time was like, "Oh, we're going to switch to start doing some Agile stuff." I'm like, "What's that?" So needless to say, I've always been a curious person. So I started learning a lot about it and of course, making lots of mistakes. So, but that's kind of, I guess, how we learn, right, Shiv?
Absolutely. Yeah. Learn and adapt. So one thing I was curious about was when I was looking at your profile, you've played roles of both an individual contributor or as a technical specialist and also been a manager.
Yep. Yeah.
So how have those transitions been for somebody who got into tech and probably expecting to do some tech stuff?
Yeah. It's been really interesting, Shiv, to kind of make those transitions back and forth throughout my career into leadership and being like, for instance, like I kind of started out as a developer and then I became like a technical lead or senior developer. And then I was I was a manager of software development, but I was still a developer, and I was also a scrum master, which, you know, if you read anything online, it's like, oh, don't do something like this, which, you know, it was really challenging. I was, you know, juggling many hats there. I was trying to be a developer on one thing and be the scrum master, but then also too, I was supposed to manage, there was a couple other projects. I was supposed to be the manager of those people as well. So it was, I was just like treading water, you know, just to kind of keep my head above water. It was a pretty intense thing, but it was a big challenge. What I learned, I guess, Shiv, going through that, and this is something as a technology person early in my career, I tried to focus on, if I just learn this technology, I'm going to help my career. And then as I kind of went through my career path and kind of stumbled on some things, I learned how important those human skills are, you know, those interaction, the communication, the influence, and how, especially when I became a leader, I really learned a lot about those. But even now, being like as an individual contributor, I see how important those are to just working with the team, or especially in an agile team, how important those human skills are, and being able to relate to whether you're talking to somebody who's in QA or the scrum master, or if maybe you're talking to an executive, you know, you need to kind of think about it from their lens. So I think those are some important aspects that I've learned.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have a question on that. Before that, there is this general perception that techies hate processes. Right?
Yeah.
And Agile, for whatever misunderstanding that people have, they think that it is, again, a process, it is micromanagement, and it is slave driving and all kinds of things people to talk about. So what is your
Yeah.
perception? What is
Yeah.
your experience?
Yeah. Well, I guess I can see how there's a lot of misconceptions about it just because, I've worked at a few different companies and I see, and doing something like the Agile Online Summit, I talk to a lot of people too, a lot of Agile coaches, and there's a lot of, things out there where people kind of misapply things or, I saw something the other day, somebody was talking about, they had a team that had their 15-minute stand up, but they had a 30-minute meeting before that. So to make the stand-up go smoothly, so it's like they're adding things to it that really aren't there, but it's, but I think a lot of the misconceptions come from just the transitions. Shiv, as you probably see with organizations, as a transition to Agile, it's not easy, it's hard. And I think a lot of times we carry some of our baggage if we're, for instance, like for an old project manager. We might carry that baggage to being a scrum master, and we might fall back on those command and control. Like, okay, I'm going to tell this team what to do. They're not going to. So it's, I think that's where a lot of the misconceptions and a lot of these ideas come from.
The other question was when you mentioned that you also learned how to talk to the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you develop that empathy as a techie?
Yeah, that's tough, Shiv. It's funny. I actually do a talk called "Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy" a lot, and I talk about in that talk one of the big things that was a light bulb moment for me. So I want to go back when I was a kid. Somebody said, "Tom, you got to read this book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People." Now, I'll be honest. As a kid, I was like, "That's stupid. I don't want to read that." But as I actually read it, but then I came back to it when I became a kind of a tech person. I remember talking to an executive. I was like, "Oh yeah, I think I went to a conference or something. I learned about a new technology and like, oh yeah, we got to use this new technology. It's going to be great." And they're just kind of looking at me like, "What? Who cares?"
Yeah.
But the next time, and I talk about this in the speech, what I learned is I needed to, and coming back to Dale Carnegie's book, is talking their terms. So once I learned what the executive was looking for, they wanted to know, how does this, value add to the business? Because they need to know, oh, it's going to make us more money, not, oh, here's Tom, he's going to spend a bunch of money on some technology that we probably don't need. So once I started to learn how to talk in their terms, that's when things shifted for me. And I started, like light bulb went off. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I did read that before, but it didn't sink in. So kind of those things, Shiv, where you might make a few mistakes and then realize, oh, okay, they want to see it from a different perspective. They're not a programmer, or they're not a techie. They don't care about, whether you're using some new whiz-bang technology. So you need to think about what they want.
So how does that change when, as a techie, I'm just making probably some assumption here, that you might have developed technology or pieces of code that others use. So when other users are techies, then how do you relate to them? And then how do you kind of solve their problems or anticipate their problems?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's been a good understanding for me is to kind of develop that user empathy, to understand who is the user. So if the user is technically savvy, you're probably going to develop a different solution than if the person is not. A while back, I got to work with a product owner named Nakia, and she had this. So we were working on a team that developed something for customer service reps. And it was really, it didn't make any sense to myself and the rest of the team until she had to spend a day with those customer service reps. So we got to go they were in a whole different town than what we were in. So we spent a day with them, and we got to kind of see how they did their work, and they used our product. And we're like, oh, it doesn't, it doesn't do what they need it to do. And then when we saw that was like that empathy of understanding, like, oh, okay, that's what they want. So I think that's the thing. If you have a tech user, a techie, as you use that term, Shiv, I think, we kind of need to understand what is the user. For instance, like, I don't know if you get this, but my mom sometimes calls me. I don't know if you get other relatives calling you to say, hey, how do I use this technology? So depending on who you're talking to, you kind of have to think. So my mom used to be an educator, so she's not as technically savvy, where some other people, obviously other programmers and stuff I work with, I talk to them. I got to use different terminology. It's important to kind of think about having that, idea of what terms will they understand, putting it in their terms. And then maybe also being patient with people. Sometimes we techies can be a little maybe a little cross with people because we're like, oh, why don't you get it? It's so easy. Right. Well, not everybody has the same experience as we do. So we have to be patient with them too.
It's interesting when at least your friends or family circles call you, they think that you know everything tech. Probably you've not even seen that. Okay?
Yes.
How does this device work, or how do I connect something to something else and all that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So with so much of changing technology and so many pieces that are moving, how do you keep track of what's happening, and how do you put them together, or pick the ones that are relevant when you're, say, designing solutions?
Yeah. I think a big thing is just, kind of having that experimental mindset of being able to try out some things and see what works, what doesn't work. And it's funny, and this is a long time ago when I first got into this Agile space. There's a guy by the name of Brandon Carlson that I used to work a little bit with I used to live in the Midwest. So in Iowa, which is a state, kind of the center part of the United States. And he reminded me, so he said, Tom, when I start with a team, I get them to kind of get their ideas out on paper and pen, because what we were talking about essentially is like, a lot of companies will say, oh, we're going to give team X, we're going to give them Jira. So now they're agile. Well, no, just because you have Jira doesn't mean you're agile. So he had said this, and I think this is important. When we think about how we work, sometimes, for instance, like if we give a team Jira, the team will just adapt to the way things work in Jira. Or if you have another technology, for instance, like I've done a lot of Java development in my career. Java development's a lot different than some of the serverless programming and some of the new technologies that we have, React. So I think when we have a paradigm, we kind of fit our thoughts into that paradigm. But he reminded me, like he liked to do, have the team create, cards. Obviously, it's a little difficult now during our pandemic, but there's ways to do this to kind of minimize that technology first, to understand how do we want to work. Because if we just simply adopt something, we're going to work the way it wants us to work. And that might be suboptimal for that team. And I think that's important as we think about how teams and how we work. We need to not be a slave to the technology, but let our decisions and let our, process evolve, and kind of, like I said, too, be experimental, look for things that might work, and be open to trying new things. I think we can get stuck in our career paths and our ideas, all of us can. So it's good to look for new things.
Yeah. So are there any stories where you had to change your mind about something?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The first time, I guess I'll say the first place I think I mentioned earlier on, like when I first got exposed to Agile and Scrum, I remember we basically tried to do some things, and we thought, oh, okay, we're going to do it kind of basically at my level. So I was a manager of a team, and then I had a manager, he was a director. So we thought we could apply basically Agile from my manager down. And one of the things we learned really quickly is how important it is to kind of manage up and let the executives and the other people in the organization know, what are we doing and what is the value add? And that's where, like, my manager and had to kind of manage up, and the rest of us too as well, to kind of share what are we doing? Because for the executives and stuff, they're like, what are these stand-ups? Why do you have these boards on the wall? What is all this stuff you're talking about? Until we kind of put it in their language, kind of like I talked about before, we had to understand that, if you're going to make a change, it has to be shared widely. And so people know what you're doing. And that's one of the big things we all learned during that process. And then it was funny, we actually made that shift. We had some people come in, some Agile coaches, kind of do some little extra training. And one of the things they did is they did some executive training as well. And that really kind of helped us shift and get kind of everything moving in the right direction. So I think that was one of a big learning that I had in my career path.
Are there things that have worked for you, but then when somebody else tried to do that, or when you tried to recommend that to somebody else, that probably didn't?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's one thing. For instance, like I've tried, like the first time I got some training, and I was trained by a group, and they shared, kind of like I went through some Scrum training and became a Scrum master. And initially I got some things to work using kind of the basics that I'd learned in the training. And then I remember I was trying to help another team kind of get up to speed. Because basically what we did is we had like, I don't know, say 5 teams. And I think I was the Scrum master one team, and there was another person. And then we tried to help some of these other teams. And we did, Shiv, to your point, we tried to rinse and repeat. Oh, we'll just do the same things. But we didn't realize, okay, first thing, that the projects were different, how they were developed were different. And it was one of those things where we learned pretty quickly, the context matters. As a lot of agile coaches and consultants will say, well, it depends. And it did depend. And we needed to kind of step back and think, okay, maybe there's parts of this is going to work. We can try. But then I think kind of an important aspect of setting expectations to say, not that this will work, but here's a few things, maybe we can try this. And then two, remembering to kind of ask the team, because a lot of times the people who work on a project, they know how it can best function. So obviously, it's good to ask them first and get their input as well.
You mentioned this command and control earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And usually the analogy that we use is the army.
Yeah.
But then when I try to understand the army a little more, yes, there is command and control at probably the outer level or at a high level, planning, strategy and all that.
Yes.
But when you're out there on combat, it's probably very agile, every person out there. So is there anything that you have tried to look at in terms of getting inspired by those kind of activities to see how we can kind of merge a command and control, probably coming from the top, or probably that's what they expect, but still keep the teams agile?
Yeah, I think one of the things with that, I think, Shiv, is really kind of understanding what they're looking for. As I've talked to different people, there's a guy, Jesse Fuel, that I've talked to a few times and gotten to know. He talks about stop selling agile, start aligning. So I think that's one of the things too, is we talk to executives and they want to be command and control, but maybe have a conversation and understand what is your pain point? What are you looking for? Is it that, you're looking for consistent delivery, or if you can kind of understand what's driving them, you can kind of help them share some of the, kind of align with what they're doing. And then two, kind of as I was talking about before, kind of manage up. So for instance, like if you want your team to be agile, but maybe two, they might be looking for certain, maybe there's certain metrics or things that pain points for them that you can kind of help make sure that they know and are aware of. So you manage up and that they understand we are still meeting the objectives that they have, but maybe we're going about it slightly different, but that's okay. I think that's the thing that, just having a conversation too is helpful, getting to know them, what they're looking for. Cause at the end of the day, there could be something keeping them up at night. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to deliver what they need.
Interesting. You mentioned metrics in passing in between, right?
Yes.
So how do you balance the desire for metrics and everything measurable, everything probably predictable, to something that is more experimental, experiential, you do learn, change, adapt, all that, both for you, your teams, as well as, say, the management?
Yeah. I think kind of like what we talked about before, I think it's helpful to understand what the management needs. And then two, make sure that they're aligned with the business. Sometimes I've seen this where, for instance, like the business might have different metrics than the IT management might have. I think that's something like, for instance, the IT management might want us to collect certain data points that in the end of the day, the business doesn't care about. So that's where I think it's good to have a wider conversation with maybe the IT management and the business to say, okay, let's make sure we're collecting the right information. But then two, there can be a bit of education along with that, as like us in the Agile space and the Scrum space, for instance, if we're using that, need to make sure that we're sharing with them these metrics and how to properly use them. So they're not, for instance, like, you've probably seen the thing where like story point inflation, where, oh, you want us to deliver this amount. Okay, well, I'll just make, all 3-point stories 5-point, and then we'll just meet that. So you kind of, there's ways, there's games that can be played. And I think too, that really, you have to just share that and get on the same level with those executives so they understand that we can get misguided priorities and kind of make be it the Scrum Master, the Agile coach, whoever might try to, if they have a certain metric, but to just kind of educate them and how to use them properly.
Yeah, it's good you said education, for which I guess a collective knowledge base is very good, key. And I think through your Agile Online Summit, you are getting a lot of knowledge in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one curiosity, the first curiosity question I would say is, with a day job, what pushed you to do the Agile Online and DevOps Online long before the pandemic, when people started looking at online ways of running conferences?
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing for me, Shiv, was that at the point when I first started doing this, I wasn't able to go to a lot of the big conferences. And I was just like, oh, there's really some interesting people speaking at, whatever the conference may be. And I was like, well, what if I interview those people and just share that with others? Would people be interested? Because at the end of the day, Shiv, the thing that drives me to do a lot of this is just the curiosity, because I want to understand how does that work? Or, for instance, like I talked about how we went through an Agile transformation really twice at the first company that I used it. And how, some of those things that kind of like, oh, I learned a lot, but I bet other people know more, so it's always curious to see, okay, how would you handle this? So for instance, Shiv, I might ask you a question, say, oh, I have this team, they're really struggling. I have a couple people that just don't want to, embrace some of these practices. What would you do? And I would ask you, and that's something too. Even you might bring up something that I haven't thought of, or something that you could share, or somebody else might share, and then somebody will think, oh, maybe we can try that. Because like we were talking about before, a lot of these things that we're doing are experiments. We're just trying different things, and it might work in company A, but company B,
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it got started, and why I started doing a lot of this.
So how are you able to get diverse set of perspectives and put them all together?
Yeah, that is a good question, Shiv. So I have to share. So I've been doing the Agile Online Summit. This is going to be the 5th year, but I think it was 2 years ago. So I've worked with a guy by the name of Vasco Duarte. So he does the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and he had a great idea. He said, Tom, I think you should have track chairs and let them do some of the interviewing. And I think that's one of the things that's really helped broaden the different perspectives, because, if I interview you, Shiv, I only have my lens of experience. But if I get, 3, 4, or 5 other people to do interviews, their questions are going to be different than the one maybe I ask, or even you ask. So they might, bring something to the table that you're like, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that. That's a unique perspective. So I think that's one of the things. So Vasco had that idea a couple of years ago, and I think that's really helped broaden the event, and to bring a lot of different people involved.
You probably know the Agile India conference. So I've been on the program committee, and that's kind of the model that has worked for us as well. That also gets a lot of community involvement, and different people bring in different perspectives, so that the people who propose sessions also get that feedback.
Yes. Yeah. That's so important. Yep.
So why this online format?
Yep.
And most of your sessions are recorded sessions, right?
Yeah. A lot of them are recorded. We do some live as well. So we're kind of doing some experiments this year. We actually are working with a company that kind of helps design events. And the guy that runs it, he has a kind of a business partner who is a professor in gamification. So we're actually working on something this year where we're going to have, they're going to put together some kind of things that help gamify what we're doing. We're putting together, for instance, like we have a participant guide. So we're going to have things where people can kind of take notes and then share that in Slack. But yeah, we're going to have some live things too. What we're going to try to do this year, we're going to try to have a live kickoff and then a live wrap up too. So we can go throughout the day. There'll be some pre-recorded stuff in there, some live stuff, but that way too, so we can kind of wrap up to share, what did you learn today? What did you take away from, for instance, like if we have a talk, like for instance, John Kern is going to talk, and he's a co-author of the Agile Manifesto. So he's one of the 17 people that were there in Utah back 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago now. But we got to interview him and just take away from his perspective. So, it's good to think about, what did you take away from that? And then two, we're going to have themes for each day. So a lot of people in the Agile space are familiar with the concept of shu ha ri. So you have the 3 kind of principles, and we have a 3-day event. So we're going to try to follow that for each day. So for instance, like the first day is going to be more fundamentals. And then the second day, we're going to be kind of some basics, kind of mastering some of those basics. And then kind of having a more of a team focus on that second day. And then the third day is going to be more of a community or a wider organizational focus, but then looking at some of those other things beyond those basics to kind of maybe some things that might be experimental, because a lot of us in the Agile space like to try new things. So we'll be able to kind of showcase maybe somebody's tried something or it's working on it, experimenting with something.
So do you see any themes emerging over the years or shift in terms of the priorities?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that and like I said, I've been doing this for 5 years and been in the Agile space for, I suppose, probably over 10 years, but just kind of seeing how there seems to be kind of shifts and waves of what we focus on. I think some of the times, for instance, like some of the scaling frameworks, I know seemed like a lot of people were focusing on that a few years ago, but it's interesting. So there's Isaac Garcia is one of our track chairs, and he's actually part of something called Coaching Agile Journeys. So he put some stuff out there, but he reminded me, and I think this is so good, that he said, Tom, we have to be conscious that there's always new people coming into our Agile space. You and I, Shiv, might think, oh, we've got this mastered, we know all this stuff, but those people that are coming in new, they need to learn, but also too, they might be bringing a different perspective of something that we haven't thought of. So I think that's important and I think that's part of why we did like this Shuha-Re concept, is we got to make sure that we're always cognizant that there's, those beginners, and that we have to honor that journey, because we're all on a journey, but we need to kind of give back. And then think about, the questions, because I'm sure for you and myself, I'm not sure if I would remember all the questions I would have had early on. And that's, something that, we can kind of reflect and think, okay, how far have we come? What have we learned? And I think that's the thing where, we need to be cognizant of that. And two, as we go through this pandemic where a lot of work is shifting, maybe there's some things we all need to be able to adapt to.
Do you have any plans for curating all the content, either over the years or across sessions and so on, to help someone navigate and get to the right pieces later, not during the conference?
Yeah, we do have, that's a couple things I've been working on, because I know, after 5 years, we have quite a bit of content. And so that's what I've been trying to start working on, some things to put together that, as we kind of course, my focus now is the event. But two, we're going to be working on some things to kind of help curate that, and then to look for ways to, give that to people in different formats. And for instance, like a few years ago, we tried, for instance, like I worked with somebody and we kind of created an audiobook version of the Agile Online Summit. So we took all that. That was a kind of an experiment we tried. We did that for a couple of years. But there's other things that I'm considering now. Like I said, I'm working with this group to help gamify the event. I think we might have some other things where we'll look for different ways to, share this content in different ways, so people can, like you said, because you probably don't want to surf through all the videos. You might want to pinpoint on a certain topic. So that's one of the things too, that we can, look for ways to give that so people can search for it.
Yeah, because that is one problem that I'm also trying to grapple with, which is audio being a serial content. You can't directly jump to something or pick pieces from, let's say, different speakers or different contributors about the same topic or different perspectives, trying to collate that. Yeah. Trying to do that. We're trying to see how best we can do that. So maybe a combination of maybe text and audio, or audio, video, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, because I know there's I've worked with a few different events where we'll take like an event, like say like your event or my event, and they'll create like maybe a ebook or something with some of the top 5 takeaways on a different topic or something like that. So yeah, those are lots of good ideas.
And yeah, I like your gamification idea. So once you have a lot of content, I could just imagine like a bookworm, probably if somebody has to go through, maybe give them a path or make that a game, so that they discover things which are out there already. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, because we want to, with the gamification, I think what we're trying to do is to like what we saw before with our event, is, for instance, like if somebody's interested on a certain topic, they might just watch that specific track or maybe a couple tracks. What we're trying to do is to, have ways to share some of the other content to get people interested in, for instance, like, maybe you might pick up a book that you wouldn't normally read. It's like, okay, let's get people to engage in this and see there might be something to learn.
For our listeners, can you share the dates and when they can register and what time zones is this targeted at?
So the event is October 25th through the 27th. So it is we'll get the schedule released here soon. But the times will be in Eastern Standard Time, US. But like I said, and you had mentioned too, there's live portions and there's pre-recorded portions. So we try to make it so it's consumable for people all over the globe, because, it's not just people here so like I'm in North America or in Europe, we have people all over. We have speakers from all over too. We have for instance, one of our track chairs, Sarika, is from India. And we have lots of speakers from, all over the world too. So, or even like, for instance, we have Evan Laybourne from the Business Agility Institute. He's also a track chair. And he's in Australia. Yeah. So we have a global audience. So we try to be cognizant of that fact. So that's why too, we're going to try to have some live things around the day to kind of help kick things off and get people to watch that content, kind of have somewhat of a community event part of that.
Coming back to Tom as a person.
Yeah.
How do you find time to do all this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny, Shiv. I asked that question to a lot of other people too. I'm trying to think. As I interview people who are really busy, like for instance, some of the people who are speaking at our conference or some of our track chairs, they are amazing people that get a lot done, and I'm always amazed. So I guess I find a lot of people inspire me to do a lot of things, like do some of these side projects and be involved. I guess one of the big things I want to do is to share a lot with the community, because I do the Agile Online Summit, but I'm also involved in a local community meetup here. So I live near Princeton, New Jersey. Okay. And there's a Princeton Agility group that I'm part of. So I'm an organizer as part of that. So that's the thing I enjoy, just kind of being curious. And so I'm always wanting to learn. And that's kind of why I started doing some of these things. So, I like to, as I do my work at work, I like to think, okay, what can I do? How could we make this better? I guess that's probably a question that's always going through my mind. I'm doing something. How could we make it better? What's an improvement? So I think, and that's part of the Agile mindset of thinking about how we can improve things.
Yeah, that's nice. I usually like to end my conversations with a question related to career advice. Mm-hmm. For two segments of people. Now, one, those who are considering a career in IT now, mm-hmm. on one hand, about the future, what we can do, etc. Is AI going to take away all these jobs, or what is it that we need to have? Mm-hmm. And the second is typically the mid-career professionals mm-hmm. who probably go through these questions of, should I stay technical? Should I become a manager? Or should I quit mm-hmm. IT? Getting into that burnout kind of situation.
Yeah.
So what would be your advice or suggestions for that?
Sure. I think for the people early in their career, I guess one of the things I would say is just to try lots of different things. For instance, like I originally started at a company, and I have the gray hair to prove it, but around when the year 2000 was coming around, so late 90s. And I remember learning about, the year 2000 is going to happen, computers are going to shut down. We started working on a lot of things, and I was exposed to a lot of different technologies. And, as going through my career, I think it's been important to kind of try different things. For instance, like trying things like, Agile and Scrum, when that was a new thing, many years ago. Now it's kind of old. Obviously the Agile Manifesto is over 20 years old now. So, but I think it's good for people in their early careers to try things, because I was listening to a guy, and he doesn't talk about for technology, but he talks about how people can find their passion. And one of the things he talks about, your passion is developed by doing something. It's by taking action. A lot of times we think about, we think we can just ponder and figure out what our passions are. Is it going to be IT? What is it going to be? But I think it's important that we need to develop those things, and we need to work at it. So I think, to explore, for those new people, to explore and take action, try some new things. For the person in the mid-level, I think it's good to kind of come back to what I talked about before, that passion. What makes you, for instance, like if you got into IT, for something. For instance, like as a developer by training, I've been a developer for a long time. I think about, what are some of the things that I enjoy about the work I do? So for instance, as I mentioned probably multiple times during this interview, I'm a very curious person. So I look for, some things that for me, that are kind of a novel approach to what I'm trying to do or something. So to think about what are some new things you can look at to bring that kind of reignite why you want it to be. Because I guess at the end of the day, if somebody's in their mid-level career and they've never felt that about technology, maybe they, for instance, got into it because they're like, oh, the pay's good. That's one of the things where they might want to consider looking at alternatives. Or two, I guess this is a thing too I see in technology. When you look at technology, there's a lot of related careers that aren't as technical. For instance, like if you wanted to shift into, like being a scrum master, you don't need to be as technical, and that's okay. That's still an important part of the organization. And I see that, for instance, like being a product owner or something, you need to understand. It's good to know how to speak techie, because I'll be honest, I'm a developer by training, and sometimes we kind of speak weird, we talk a little different than normal people. But I think that's the thing too, maybe thinking about a subtle shift, or to looking for ways to, maybe for instance, it might be just changing companies, because I think sometimes the way, you work in one organization might be completely different. For some people, they like to have the same lane, stay in their lane. Where, I've experienced worked at some smaller companies where, you might wear many hats, and that's okay if that's what you like. So finding a place that fits you best, especially if you're in that mid-career and maybe you're not as happy with your technology career.
Thanks, Tom. It's been wonderful. We've pretty much come to the end of this episode. And I'm sure there are a lot of topics that I have noted down of common interest. I'll reach out to you and maybe we can have another conversation later. So thanks a lot once again for taking the time. And we will share the details of the summit in the show notes. Excellent. So that our listeners, whoever wants, can join and learn from the summit.
Thank you so much, Shiv. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. It's been a lot of fun.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.